The end of political opposition in Russia. It looks and feels completely legal. Tonight, our leaders in Europe and the U.S. taking notes. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. This is The Day. Defiant as ever, this was Alexei Navalny earlier today, a presidential hopeful in Putin's Russia.
My plan is always the same, to fight for a free Russia, whatever the court decides.
And then the verdict, guilty of embezzlement.
This is a sort of telegram from the Kremlin, saying they believe I'm too dangerous to take part in the election.
However brave Navalny can be, however eloquent his speeches are, I think the Kremlin has demonstrated that Navalny does not have a political future.
And later tonight,
I watched last night in amazement, and I heard things that I couldn't believe.
leaders in the U.S. and Europe debating how to secure their borders.
There will be no illegal migration to Europe.
And still welcome unprecedented numbers of migrants.
Suspend the entry of all aliens.
So what about voices from the Middle East? Tonight, my guest is Princess Basma of Saudi Arabia. Also coming up for the Berlin Film Festival tonight, it's Lights, Cameras, Action, the ultimate insider's preview of the Berlinale. That's coming up later on in the show. We begin the day with a reminder from the court of who's in charge. Today, a Russian judge found Alexei Navalny guilty of embezzling money. Now, the verdict is a political death sentence in Russia because it disqualifies Navalny from running in the 2018 election, and that is important. Navalny has been described as the Freddy Krueger of Vladimir Putin's political nightmares, a young, charismatic, social media savvy man with appeal in both urban and rural Russia. All the ingredients needed to ride a populist wave coming from Trump's America and Brexit Britain. Putin, it seems, had had enough of any potential upstart. So today, justice, Putin justice, was served.
This is Alexei Navalny, Vladimir Putin's leading political adversary and an anti-corruption advocate. He's now been found guilty of embezzling timber worth about 250,000 euros. After the verdict was read, he insisted the move was politically motivated. What we see now is a message from the Kremlin, a message saying that they consider me, my team, and the people whose views I'm representing too dangerous to be allowed into the election campaign. The guilty verdict is déjà vu for him. In 2013, he was found guilty on the same charges, but his sentence was overturned in Russia after the European Court for Human Rights called the proceedings unfair. This time, the same outcome and the same punishment, a suspended 5-year sentence. Whether he can still legally run is uncertain. Navalny says his lawyers will appeal the decision. By Russian law, anyone convicted of a serious offense cannot stand in elections. If Navalny does end up in the race with Putin, he has a long way to go. He trails the Russian president in opinion polls, but having his name on the ballot may be enough of a thorn in the Kremlin side.
Well, joining me tonight is Professor Vera Molnar from the New School for Social Research in New York. She's in Berlin this semester as a research fellow at the American Academy. Professor Molnar, welcome to the show. It's good to have you here. Your research looks at the rise of populism and radical nationalism. How would you describe democracy in Russia tonight, especially after the verdict that we saw today?
Well, unfortunately, I have to say I'm not terribly surprised by the verdict. And I think especially in Russia, we have seen that courts are being instrumentalized for political reasons to eliminate political competition. I also think that, in countries where corruption is so endemic, as it is in Russia, but I will also say in Hungary, for instance, then it's always easy to find somebody guilty of embezzlement, right? So again, we see this, legal decisions being instrumentalized for political purposes.
I know you're looking into radical nationalism in Hungary. Is it a coincidence that Vladimir Putin and Viktor Orban are allying themselves? Hungary, as I understand it, used to be Eastern Europe's liberal beacon before the end of the Cold War.
Yes, certainly. And also, calling the relationship between Putin and Orban an alliance is maybe going a little bit too far.
How would you describe it?
I think Orban is playing a very strategic, tactical game here. And, Putin was just in Hungary last week. But even the New York Times coverage, if you read it carefully, it was describing this friendship as a kind of uneasy friendship, right? Where you don't have unconditional trust on either side. And again, what I would say that Orban is playing a tactical game here is because it's really difficult to get popular support for a Russian alliance in Hungary. Russians crushed all the Hungarian revolutions in the past 200 years. But I think what Orban is doing is trying to make politics a more bipolar or multipolar game in Europe. And so it's also a message to the European Union, right?
Well, yeah, let's expand this out across Europe. We're seeing the rise of far-right parties, France, the Netherlands. We've got the AfD here in Germany. What is happening in these societies that makes this kind of populism popular? And they're becoming credible within liberal democracies. How is that possible?
Well, we always have had far-right parties in the parliamentary systems of European countries, and I'm not sure that the terminology of far-right is the best way to describe these parties right now. I would prefer to use the term populism or nationalist populism. So these parties are very different from what we usually consider far-right, in the 80s and the 90s. You certainly see a shift. We see a renationalization of European identity, but there have been lots of different kinds of pressures, right? The migration pressure, the security pressure, the aftermath of the financial crisis. So I think we need to see this shift in this larger context of structural changes, right? Economic, social, and so on.
What you're saying here is it's not the usual suspects here that are selling this new identity. It sounds like you're saying even pop culture or NGOs, civil society, the good guys, if you will, may actually be helping this change and these populist parties grow.
Yeah, because I think, you have to have these ideas present in popular culture so that high politics can tap into it. And we've been seeing this change actually since Hungary joined the EU, right? So this is not something that happens overnight and when there is some kind of trigger, but it's been building up for over a long time. So this national shift, it actually started around 2004 when Hungary joined the EU, and it's been slowly building up.
So we've had this shift, taking hold slowly. I'll ask you, is there a way then to rescue liberal democracy? Can credibility in institutions such, as the state, can they ever be restored completely?
I hope. Yeah, I'm an academic, so I'm not into predictions.
Yeah.
I deal with the reasons.
What does your inner voice tell you?
Yeah, well, I try to be optimistic on that point. I think there is still hope. I think still all these parties operate within a democratic system, right? Yeah. So we're seeing a shift, but it's still within the frameworks of liberal democracy, and I hope it's not going to be beyond that.
Yeah, I think we can agree on that for sure. Professor Molnar, Research Fellow at the American Academy in Berlin. Professor, thank you very much for being on the day. We appreciate it.
Thank you.